We'll just jump right into our introductions. I'm Jesse Hunter. I'm the civil engineer that works out of Kenai for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Originally from Colorado, got my degree from Montana State University in 2015. Moved up here in June 2022. And I asked Emily to help me out with this presentation. There's going to be some crop related stuff. So I'll have her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Emily McDonald. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of your faces because I get to work with you. I am the lead planner / soil conservationist here in the Homer Field office. So I cover from the Nilichik down. And I'm the person who kind of handles the contractual stuff. So I bring Jesse in when I need assistance with engineering and design work. I'm originally from the Boston area. I graduated from a small college called Unity College in Maine in 2019. I've been with NRCS just over about 6 years.
Cool. So if people aren't familiar, we work for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. What is the Natural Resource Conservation Service?
It's not working. There it goes. No, wrong way.
Okay, so we're an agency within the Department of Agriculture. What we do is we provide technical and financial assistance to private landowners that produce food or fiber. So that includes ranchers, farmers, loggers. But generally, anybody who wants to grow their food here in Alaska can participate in our program. Our motto is helping people help the land. And our technical and financial assistance revolves around conserving natural resources. Hence the name. And today we're going to talk about how to conserve water through irrigation water management. So that's why we're here. This doesn't work now. So
Sometimes it requires me to click one. Again.
there we go. All right. So why are you all here and why is it important that we irrigate here in Alaska, right? There's obviously plenty of rain and precipitation. That's pretty apparent, especially this winter. So zoom in on that a little bit. There's a spatial component or a time component when it comes to rain. And we can't just assume the rain is going to be enough for what our crops need, especially at the most important times. So we have to irrigate. Irrigation, through good irrigation practices, we can also increase our efficiency. So again, conserving water. A lot of folks growing in high tunnels use mostly like drip irrigation, micro irrigation practices to reduce humidity and therefore disease and pests in their high tunnel. So healthier plants. We're going to hammer the soil water plant relationship throughout this presentation, but another good reason to be irrigated is the ability to distribute soluble additives like fertilizers. It's easy distribution system. All right. So what we're going to go through today, we're going to start off with some of the theory, around irrigation. So I'm a civil engineer. I'm presenting as an engineer. These are the things that I go through when I look at designing a system for some of our producers. And in that, we determine the volume to irrigate and what frequency we need to irrigate. So we'll kind of look at the theory of irrigation, siting, and then we'll go through some actual tools, some tangible things that people can utilize on their farms to better understand that soil plant climate relationship and maximize their crop yield and minimize how much water they're using. Okay, so this is going to be hammered into you guys over this presentation. But the major factors that affect an irrigation design are going to be, again, your climate, your crop, and your soil. And when we're designing irrigation systems, those kind of converge into two sub-factors or variables. You have your evapotranspiration. So big word, but this means how much water your plant is using, right? And that varies quite a bit. That's what I asked Emily to come in here and present on, because I deal with all the hard things like pipes and reservoirs and stuff like that. She deals with all the soft drain stuff. So I'm gonna have her chat with you guys about the evapotranspiration.
So evapotranspiration, like Jesse was saying, go to the next slide. Kind of is a relationship between. Can I click it? Oh, we can do that now, sweet. So evapotranspiration is defined as the movement of water from plants and soil into the atmosphere, right? So basically just perspiration. You might remember this word from high school biology. And what we're talking about here is this slide specifically focuses on your crops and how those impact how much water you're using. The amount of water contained within a plant, right, varies a little bit by size, but it also is dictated by the surface area of the plant as well. Different plants have different structures on the outside to protect themselves. So if you think of a broccoli plant, for example, or a kale plant, they have thick, rubbery, almost I would guess rubbery, waxy leaves, right? Those plants do not lose water nearly as quickly as something like peas or lettuce, which, will really, you'll blink and it feels like they've completely dried out. The crops, sorry, totally lost my train of thought. Yeah, so you have the other thing to consider too with crops is the size and stage and the ratio of the water within them, right? So many of you have planted small baby plants before and seen them shrivel super quickly. So in those situations, you're going to need a lot more water consistently available than when you're dealing with a mature plant. I think for peony growers specifically, water early in the season is super important, and you guys don't want a ton of water in your soil later on in the season to help preserve your plant roots, right? So the other factor for evapotranspiration would be climate. So climate contains a ton of different factors. So we're going to look at wind, precipitation, temperature, humidity, how much sun there is. A really rainy year like 2023, right? Your plants aren't going to need nearly as much water because it's not nearly as hot or sunny as a year like, say, June of this year, where we hit 70 degrees a handful of time in Homer, which is super exciting. And the sun was out, there was a nice breeze. Think of when you're out and about, on the ocean, your lips get super dry and chapped, the wind's just blowing all that water off. Same thing happens to your plants. In Homer specifically, we have the bluff, which dictates a lot of our microclimates. And so considering how your location of your property will also impact how much water you're going to lose, because a property on the south side is not of a slope is going to lose water a lot more quickly than somebody who's on the north side of the bluff in Homer. I'm sorry for using Homer as an example for people online who don't know our topography super well. So there's just a range of considerations there in regards to climate.
And high tunnels too, right?
Yes.
They have their own microclimate.
And then high tunnels on top of that, they're incredibly humid, but they don't rain. And they exacerbate the sun to make it even stronger and more intense, but they can protect it from the wind. So what's going on in your high tunnel is going to be totally different than what is going on in your outside gardens. So you have all those, so the humidity, I've already given one presentation today, so I think my brain just gave up after that one. And so yeah, so I have this little graph here, and I think these two graphs, I just borrowed them from Google, they're just Homer weather averages. And it just highlights the time when you are planting, April, May, June. It's also the time when we are receiving our most sun days. And we are receiving our lowest amounts of precipitation, as you can see down here. Those are when our temperatures are the warmest, but that's also when our plants need the most water. So if you're outside, you're not receiving the input you need at a very critical stage of plant growth. third portion that Jesse's gonna talk about is the soil and the available water capacity within. So,
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so that's, I think Emily portrayed that there's just a lot of variables that go on in terms of how much water your crop is gonna absorb through the soil. So now we'll kind of go through the variables that happen within the soil. And that is portrayed through the, like I was saying, the available water capacity. So if we're gonna define the available water capacity, is the maximum amount of water, the maximum amount of plant available water a soil can provide. So it's an indicator of a soil's ability to retain water and make it sufficiently available for plant use. Available water capacity is the water held in soil between its field capacity and permanent wilting point. A little bit in the weeds, but I think everybody can generally understand, like, available water capacity is how much water you have in your soil that your plant can absorb, right? And that's going to differ between soils. And this is a good visual. On the right, we've got a sandy loam versus a clay loam on the left. And so envision dumping out 5-gallon bucket of water on top of each one of these soils. And after 24 hours, your soil profile is going to look quite a bit different from your sand to your clay. This is another good point when we're thinking about different irrigation systems. So like sprinkler versus micro irrigation. Say you were to be irrigating out on a really clay loam with a sprinkler, you're probably going to lose a lot of that water to runoff, and that's poor conservation practice. So those who participate in our programs, a lot of times, most of the times, honestly, we stipulate that they use drip irrigation or micro irrigation systems that are more accurate and bring that water straight to the plant's roots.
What's micro irrigation?
Micro irrigation, yeah. So it's it is a bit broad as well. To kind of narrow it down, just imagine like soaker tape, micro irrigation drip tape.
Mm-hmm.
It's a polyethylene tube about 5/8 diameter. Has small emitters.
It's not drip. You're not talking about drip.
It is drip.
Okay. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So drip tape, micro irrigations are we use them pretty interchangeably. That's like our official words for it. Think high tunnel, polytunnel, greenhouse, how they can all kind of be used interchangeably.
Okay. Thank you.
And we also allow like some micro misters or sprinklers and stuff like that. The main point is just to have better accuracy on where you're applying water.
Are your numbers on the left-hand side, are those inches? 12 inches, 24 inches, 36 inches? What is that?
Yeah, I would
indicative?
assume so. It looks like the bottom is inches, so I think the top are as well. Or sorry, the y-axis.
Right, from the furrow center, so just here, okay.
Yeah. And
72 inches.
then that's, a time component 6 foot
That
within.
seems like really long. Right now.
Well, if you had a bucket of sand or you're playing at the beach, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, would it seem that strange if you were to dump a 5-gallon bucket on that sand for it to be 6 feet, to find it 6 feet
I have
down?
sandy loam
Yeah.
on my farm. And so for me, and I'm thinking how much I irrigate,
Mhm.
to think that it's actually down that far.
6 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just seems, yeah,
Yeah.
a
And,
lot.
this could be an exaggeration to just drive home the point, right?
Okay,
Sandy soils, they distribute water a lot quicker than a clay soil.
okay.
So
And how long does it hold on to the water?
not as long as the clay soil.
It also depends too on that's where your climate factors really come into play. If you want your soil, like a clay soil, think about hot clay, baked in the sun, right? That will, because it's right at the surface there, that will dry out faster. Versus a sandy loam, it's gonna be a lot deeper. So you're still gonna have water, but it's all gonna be just really deep and your plants aren't gonna be able to reach it. So it depends on the climate, like putting things like mulch down, for example, will also help retain a lot of the moisture.
Thank you.
Yeah, does that all make sense?
Well, and also it's impacted by how much organic matter is in your sandy loam.
Right.
Your clay
Great
loam.
point.
And These are just illustrating kind of like the general concepts.
Yeah.
Every farm soil, like dig holes at basically everybody's Erie's farms, and everyone has a little different soil, and even field to field, you're gonna have different soils. And that's why, your hill that you've just broken, if you're putting in a new field on a steep slope, right? That maybe has the exact same soil type, versus your flat level area where you have your high tunnel. Like those are gonna lose water at slightly different rates because the hill, maybe there's more sun exposure, there's more drainage available there versus your flat spot behind your house. The water is gonna sit there a little longer. It doesn't have quite the same direct sun exposure. And those are all kind of things. Your house might protect it from the wind versus it being completely exposed. All those are gonna impact how quickly you lose, moisture.
Right. It's a great point about, a lot of folks will amend their soils with, horse manure, compost, if I get this right, worm castings, right? It's all organic matter. And it's pretty common sense that, most of you guys probably know that the organic matter holds on to that water a lot better. And so that's wrong direction. So these are just kind of the numbers. I couldn't help myself as an engineer. So again, we've got, low available water capacity in our sands, very coarse sand probably being the worst. And then you have your higher available water capacities. And so peat, and for folks who don't know, peat is very high organic matter, right? So it's going to absorb a lot more of that available water capacity, or just absorb more water, hold more water. So it's more available for plants.
I don't have any sand. I just have, way down this clay, and then we have a lot of topsoil. And then I accumulate this topsoil. How does, this doesn't fit, so that example doesn't fit into either one of these.
So topsoil, is a generic catch-all name essentially for soil. If you'd like, we can come out and texture your soil, or we can look at the soil map. Is it soil that you've brought in? Or is it just soil that's there?
Oh, it doesn't go down. That looked like 27 feet or something. I don't know. It's only about 2 feet deep because I've collected it from,
Yeah, so
Fine.
topsoil typically is a really high organic matter topsoil typically has a really high organic matter content.
right.
And then the texture will depend a little bit on the source material. So sometimes people add sand or silt or clay to kind of give it texture within. And so if you're bringing that in or like creating it somehow, you probably are going to have a lower amount of drainage. So that's, it's basically more of like a peat-like material than a true soil profile, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
And it's another good point that it's hard to find soils that are completely uniform like this too. You said you had a clay layer,
Way
couple-
down,
way down. Yeah, so
2 or 3 feet.
2-3 feet. So that still probably does affect and holds more water in your topsoil, right? Because it doesn't have the ability to penetrate down. So that's something to be thinking about when you're irrigating and thinking about the soil moisture in your soils. A lot of other people are a different scenario is some people have gravels underneath their topsoil. So gravels allow that water to penetrate a lot faster. And so they're losing water from their topsoil into their gravels. So a lot of this is just knowing your property, right? Yes, knowing your land, understanding what your soils are like in your fields, and then being able to make the right decisions when it comes time to irrigate.
And then you have water coming down a hill, and is it gonna saturate your site or not?
Sure.
So besides what you're adding to it, how much are you gonna have on the outside
Right.
coming into that area?
Right.
That's another determination.
Mhm.
Yep, springtime, things start melting off and getting really nasty and mucky. Yeah,
Another one with town lots too to consider is, especially, or if you're building a property, is backfill. I run into that quite a bit on a lot of the like lots, especially you think like West Hill, that area between the hospital and like West Hill Road, because those were all developed sites. They brought in fill. They bring in, you know, sometimes they'll bring in clay and things to put around basements, and that kind of trickles out and around, and those impact your water a lot, quite a bit. So if you live in a very like urban suburban lot, that would also be something to consider. I deal with it personally at my house. It definitely alters groundwater flow to the point it takes out a
You're gonna
driveway.
bring a lot of soil in.
Well, we didn't build it, but yeah. I'm presuming based on how the topography looks.
Okay. Any more questions? I mean, this is all good discussion. And hopefully everybody's catching on online. So the web soil survey is a good resource for folks. I'm not gonna get too in depth on it, but it's a website where you can go and produce reports on your soils, your area of interest, anywhere you're interested in. This is actually, excuse me, pretty local. We have an office in Homer that does all this, all the data entry and statistics and stuff like that. So
Is there hard copies of the old survey that was done in the fifties, soil survey?
probably,
In our records building, which
But
are
not.
not
just for
really
people.
available,
Yeah.
they've digitized it all, and the tool is really cool. I also have a little guidebook in my office. We have little brochures to show you how to pull a soil survey report.
Okay.
Or I can also, if you make an appointment, I can walk you through it as well.
Okay.
Print the report and stuff.
great. All right, for the sake of time, we're gonna keep moving. I'm not gonna get too in depth on these equations, but you know, when it comes time to calculate when it's time to irrigate, that available water capacity and evapotranspiration rate are factored into your calculations, right? So you're kind of envision no rain, your water is being absorbed through the soils by the plant, and how long does it take that plant to absorb enough soil where we need to replenish it, right? So there's your irrigation frequency. And now that it's time to irrigate, you have to think about how much. Now, how much water did that plant take from the soils that we need to replenish?
So if you're doing plant rotation, how do you have to move these irrigation things back and forth for this plant versus that plant?
So these are rules of thumb. We just wanted to kind of show what Jesse uses to kind of get an idea. When you come through one of our programs, you'll get a sheet that says you're gonna irrigate this much a week, right? But as we just learned, that's gonna vary a lot week to week, day to day. And just like if you're following a rotation, vary a lot plant to plant. Vegetable plants, you know, you're looking at a root depth of between 3 and 12 inches. So, you know,
So if
you're probably not gonna be able to water on that detail of a scale, because I mean, I put lettuce right next to, you know, a tomato plant. Those are two very different roots. And so having a more, you know, this is again, just a jumping off point. It's on average, you should be looking at probably this amount, but if it's 75 degrees and you're in a high tunnel, that's gonna be way more versus if it's 55 degrees in October, or not 55, I wish it was 55 degrees. in October. If it's 35 degrees in October, then you're gonna have a lot less. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So there's a program, you have a program that
Yes.
will help people with this? Is
Yeah.
that what you're
So
saying?
we will talk about that at the very
Okay.
end of the
Yeah.
slide.
yeah. Again, for the sake of time, so this, you know, we don't need to go through this, but really just want you guys to be thinking about, you know, conceptualize what are the factors that go into irrigation, right? You have plants, you absorb water, you have soil, it provides the water. How much do we need to be putting on that soil to keep our plants growing? Okay, so now on to some tools. These are essentially soil moisture meters. Technically, they're tensiometers. The two on the right are two of the tools that we use, or that we stipulate our producers use when they're contracted with the NRCS. They're not super user friendly. I don't know if Allison can talk to them, but
Sir, what'd you figure out?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer actually the electronic tensometer over trying to calibrate one of the sticks.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool.
I think it's quicker in the long run to take regular samples to monitor.
Gotcha. That's good to hear. The one in the middle, they're pretty finicky. And they're expensive. The one on the right is just an example of something that, you know, if you're not in an NRCS program, you can go out to your big box store or order it on Amazon. And it's just essentially a tool for you to be able to understand how much water is in your soil. And they're not the only tool. So another point, usually folks in our programs, we have them install their soil meters at 2 depths, one at average root depth, and then the second below root depth. And that second one below root depth is to be able to recognize if you're overwatering your plants, right? The whole idea is water conservation. And if water goes past your roots, then you're not conserving water. Okay. The NRCS has a great publication called Estimating Soil Moisture by Feel and Appearance. So if you're the kind of person who likes to literally get their hands dirty, this is a good reference for you to be able to go out into your field and pick up a handful of dirt and manipulate it with your hand and be able to get a decent feel, literally, for what kind of moisture is in your guys' soils. So that's another tool for determining the amount of water in your soil. Another one I'm gonna have Emily talk to. It's just monitoring your plants.
So basic science of plant stress, so you can under and overwater plants. It goes both ways. I see beginning new growers make both mistakes pretty frequently. For underwatering, your plant will just overall look sad. It's basically the way, I don't know if you've ever seen just you just get a very depressed vibe from it. Truly, like, especially with house plants, I think that's the easiest visual indicator for it, but you'll see a full body droop. The key with underwatering is that the stems are also lacking in structure and water, and so the stems themselves. On a lettuce plant, you're not going to see that. On a tomato plant, if you look at the stem, it's going to look really sad and it's going to lose a lot of its structure. Curling leaves is also really common. Versus with overwatering, it can be a little tricky to tell the difference, but if the stems still look rigid and like they have water in them, they're not dehydrated, but those leaves look sad, just the leaves, then you're probably overwatering. You also, a lot of times with overwatering, you'll see like a formation of an algae on top of your soil. If your soil is way too saturated, you also lose color, or there's a discoloration in the leaves. That can also sometimes be a nutrient deficiency, so I would definitely look at it a little bit. Purple doesn't typically mean overwatering, but like a yellow or a white on your leaves, that could potentially be overwatering. Yeah, those are kind of the easy go-to signs. I do think always just feel your soil. Don't look at the top, like dig next to your plants and look around. The tensiometers just are the easy way to do it without getting your hands dirty.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about how to monitor how much water you're irrigating with. So these are totalizing flow meters here. Again, another tool that we stipulate our program participants use. They measure your flow rate, so gallons per minute. They also totalize how many gallons that you're using. So obviously this is a good tool if you're trying to determine how many gallons you've irrigated on your crops, but it's not the only tool. These are not all that cheap, and they usually get installed in some crazy looking thing like this. But if you, I mean, there's multiple ways to do that. Do you guys recognize that? We were trying to figure out whose it was.
No,
That's not ours.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it wasn't that nice.
It's up there for a reason, right? It's a good model. But like I said, flow meter is not the only way to do it. A lot of times, if you have just a tank that you're irrigating out of, you know, marking your water line before you irrigate, and then marking your water line after you irrigate. And, you know, a lot of times those tanks will actually have, some markings on there, how many gallons. But, you know, I like to encourage people to do some math. So if you know the radius of your tank, you can figure out the volume of water that you use. Another good idea or way to do it is take a 5-gallon bucket and time how long it takes to fill up your bucket, right? If, you know, you turn your hose on and it takes 30 seconds to fill up your 5-gallon bucket, then you can calculate you've got a 10 gallon per minute flow rate coming out of your hose. You can take it out onto your crop and determine how many gallons of water that you put out on the land by how long it took. So another, of course, me pushing more math on everybody. The question that I get a lot of times is how to equate gallons to inches, right? Because rain is measured in inches. And for those who farm outdoors, you're gonna want to understand how many gallons are in inches. So going from gallons to inches, you multiply your gallons by 1.6. And one thing I forgot to add is you need to know the square footage of your irrigated ground. So going from gallons to inches, multiplying gallons by 1.6, divide by your irrigated ground, and that's how many inches of water you just irrigated. In the reverse, you're looking to go from inches to gallons. You take your inches of water, multiply it by 0.6, multiply by your irrigated ground, and that produces your gallons of water. So we'll do a real quick example. So for instance, if we're trying to irrigate 1 inch of rain, which sounds like rule of thumb, folks probably heard this, 1 inch of rain every week, keep the plants happy. So let's say it's been a week since we watered, and we're gonna put 1 inch of rain on our 30 by 70 high tunnel. Realistically, we probably only about half of that high tunnel as actual growing space, you know, in rows versus walkways. So pretty easy calculation down here at the bottom. You take 1 inch, or you want to irrigate your 1 inch of rain, multiply it by your conversion factor. Then you have your 30 by 70 foot high tunnel. So 30 foot by 70 foot gives you your square footage of irrigated ground. Multiply that by 0.5 or 50%, right? Because we're only growing in 50% of the high tunnel. And that produces 630 gallons. For some of you less seasoned, like that's a lot of water. 630 gallons once a week could be a lot of work if you're watering by hand. So that's
Alex
just,
and Beth are just like nothing.
that's rule of thumb, right? I mean, obviously, like we talked about, you get into some really hot, dry weather without rain, that could easily double or triple.
Another for people who are a lot smaller scale, 100 square feet of garden space, right? So 4 10-foot rows that are 2.5 feet wide, you know, very small scale garden, you're looking at 60 gallons a week, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're stood there watering at 1.5 gallons per minute, that's a really long time. So that's just kind of put in perspective how much water your plants would need. And that needs to be water that's accessible to the plants, right? Not the stuff that's running off into your path. So a lot of times if you're hand watering, you might need to increase that rate quite a bit.
Okay, and then, you know, really the impetus behind this whole presentation and what I want to transfer to you folks is to just, you know, have a better understanding of the relationship between your crops, your soil, and the water. And one way that we pretty much force our producers to do that is by keeping good records. And so you don't have to be a participant of the NRCS to do this, but it's just good practice. And so what we have our participants do is go out into their fields and they'll write down what their soil moisture readings are. And this is before they irrigate, right? So they've got a basis to work off of. Then we'll have them irrigate, record how much they irrigate. And then after a certain amount of time, it's kind of gonna depend on your soils, but when you think that that water has penetrated down to your average root depth, we'll ask that the producers go out again and take the second reading from their soil moisture sensor, just to understand, again, how this whole relationship works, right? And be taking good notes. You know, for instance, the plants are looking stressed out or wilty, or we had an inch of rain last night, you know, whatever. Again, this is just so you all can better understand and better utilize water on your land, so that we can conserve it. Cool. Thank you guys for hanging in there. So just to conclude, we went over some theory, worked through evapotranspiration rates and just some of the theoretical stuff behind what it takes to calculate irrigation frequency and irrigation volume. Had some good discussions in there over some of the soil stuff, and then presented some tangible tools for you all to actually utilize out there on your farms. Better understand, again, how your crop has how it relates to the water and the soil climate. So to end our presentation, just wanted to let you all know, obviously you have good representation in Homer with Emily Conservation District. But for folks who are tuning in virtually, we have statewide coverage. We have offices in Fairbanks and Delta for those who live in the north, office in Wasilla, and then myself, I sit in Kenai. Obviously, we have an office in Homer. We have representation in Kodiak. You're gonna want to call the phone number first. We don't actually have someone sitting there. And then we also have an office in Juneau. And with that, I think we can open it up to questions. And that's anything from the theory to how to participate in NRCS programs.
Yes.
Yeah, do you have any recommendations for resources to actually, engineer a drip system?
Looking right at it, yeah.
So
That's what the calculations were.
Yeah, I get that, but I'm looking at the practical means of just actually, how many manifolds I need and, whether I should have sprinkler or drip in certain areas and how to, lay it out,
Yeah,
the engineering part of it.
I'm happy to have conversations about that. I typically, it takes a lot of communication between the engineer and the farmer because there's just so many different variables. A lot of times, one irrigation setup is gonna serve one crop best. But if you're rotating through crops, then you're gonna have to put in a different system. And so,
So if you'd like, you can, my card's on the back table and you can shoot me an email and then, me and you can kind of chat. I have like pretty solid baseline. Jesse set me up pretty well. And then if it's more advanced and beyond my scope, I'll bring Jesse in. And so we can kind of chat, because like Jesse said, it's really based on your garden. For all we know, you have a 15% slope and that completely changes things compared to, a 10 by 10 flat garden in town. So there's a lot of variables.
yeah, but we're here to help.
Yeah.
Come find us.
So do they have programs that will help you fund your irrigation
Yeah.
system?
So, works very similarly to the high tunnel irrigation systems do a lot more variables because we can start all the way from the source, working through to your drip tape and management portion. So it kind of depends on what your source water you want to use, how much space we're looking at. Typically you need to have all your records set up, but I also need 2 years of irrigation history.
So your past record?
Yeah. Well, so there's NRCS/Farm Service Agency records. And then there is also irrigation records. So I need something that shows you have been irrigating the land throughout the last 5 years. Doesn't have to be quite as detailed as the form Jesse was showing, like I don't expect that, but I kind of give people, I have some draft paperwork that I have people fill out. And honestly, I use this kind of test to see if you're going to be able to complete the whole project. Because it gets you in the habit of taking the records that you need to take. I think every farmer here, like, I don't think any farmer gets into it or, record keeping or the business, like all the business and numbers side of it. You get it because you like being outside in the dirt. But having really great records saves people all the time. Not necessarily as much with irrigation, but it would allow you to, for example, if you can leave your farm if you have really good records because hey, it's 65 degrees, but it's cloudy and raining. I normally need this much water applied. So you can tell your house sitter to apply that much water. So, yeah. And if you're interested in specifics, grab my card and we can chat. Yes, Nick.
We have a question about what are the best mulch materials?
So that depends on your system. In straight water management, the less permeable, the better. But then you get into the conversation about whether or not you want plastics. Do you want, you also in Alaska too, sometimes some mulch materials like wood chips and things can, I've heard, lead to decreased soil temperature. So that's another thing to consider. Yeah, so you're looking at typar, basically like a wood mulch or a green mulch, which would just be like chopped up leaves and things, not a decomposed material. And when you do something like a wood mulch or green mulch, you're looking at risks of altering your nutrient structure in your soil. So there's pros and cons to each. Like no one is significantly better than, they're all going to reduce the amount of water that you're losing.
He was. And if anyone's you guys doing this tour. If anyone's more interested in learning more about mulch, on March 6th, we have an entire Know Your Land talk on just mulch. It's called the Great Mulch Study, and we have Glenn Gannon from UAS Cooperative Extension talking about that. So if you're really excited about mulch, that's one to catch.
Do you have any other questions in chat?
I've got one point that I wanted to bring up that you had just reminded me of is another huge opportunity with irrigation is automation, right? And like I was just talking to Vic about fishing during the summer. It'd be nice to leave the farm during the summer to go do other things, right? So if you have a nice, well-engineered irrigation system that you can automate, I mean, literally these days, you can get a system off of Amazon that you can plug into your phone, an application on your phone, and
Does that need to have power to do that or?
Yeah, and
Or I mean, you can just do solar battery?
Yeah,
there's solenoids
Yeah.
that manipulate your valves and stuff like that. So I don't think it's a huge energy demand, but it's possible.
we also have an option through our conservation stewardship program, which is a program for people producing for a while. So I call it advanced management, CSP. And essentially we can pay for a weather station to go off of an existing NRCS irrigation system. And through that, we call it advanced automated irrigation water management. The people I've done it with so far, it's really cool because if you can you get it hooked up to like Bluetooth or your internet and it sends it to your phone. And so you could literally be hundreds of miles away and operating your irrigation system with live weather data from your property. And again, I mean, Homer has tons of microclimates. Like when we pull weather averages to calculate your irrigation data, that's from the airport. Like that is not the same as McNeil, that is not the same as Olson Mountain, and that is not the same as Diamond Ridge or Ninilchik. Like they're all very different. So it allows you to have and create a data set for real time, first year, you're not going to see as much, but over the course of 5 or 10 years, like that data set will be valuable.
Do they have something like that that'll also pull your weeds?
Maybe that's called having kids.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Cool.